Parashah 36. This is another parashah that is jam-packed with important matters, all of which teach us a great deal about the mind and heart of Yahweh. But rather than try to consider all aspects covered in this parashah, I think it's better to focus on just a few things, just a couple of topics, and look at those in detail. As I said, I want to focus on just two important subjects today, which are in chapter 12, and then we move back to look at chapter 8. So starting with chapter 12, it looks at the words of Miryam and Aharon that were spoken against Moshe, and how their words rebounded particularly on Miryam. What Yahweh did to her had a profound effect on that first generation of Israel, and should also serve as a reminder to us as part of the 21st century Messianic community, just how the anger of Yahweh how angry Yahweh can become when his people in his community turn upon their leaders. As we read in verses 1 through 4, Miryam began criticizing Moshe, and on the account of the Ethiopian woman that he had married. And they said, "Is it true that Yahweh has spoken only with Moshe? Hasn't he spoken to us too?" Suddenly, Yahweh told Moshe, Aaron, and Miryam, "Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting." And the three of them went out to meet Yahweh. The narrative gives no indication why Moshe married the Ethiopian woman, and why that was a problem. Little or nothing is said about Moshe and his first wife Zipporah, the Midianite, who had borne him 2 children. However, it is unlikely that she had actually travelled with Israel when they left Mount Horeb. So while the marriage appears to be the primary reason for Miriam's outburst, the real reason for her challenge is revealed in verse 2, which appears to be a joint challenge between both Miryam and Aharon. There they said, "Is it true that Yahweh has only spoken with Moshe? Hasn't he spoken to us too?" Those words appear to have been the real cause of the problem. Having heard their comments, Yahweh demanded all three be present at the tent of meeting. When all three were assembled, Yahweh descended in the column of cloud and spoke with them, saying, "Listen to what I say. When there is a prophet among you, I, Yahweh, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. But it isn't that way with my servant Moshe. He is the only one who is faithful in the entire household. With him I speak face to face and clearly, not in riddles. He sees the image of Yahweh. So why weren't you afraid to criticize my servant Moshe?" The anger of Yahweh flared up against them, and he left. With those words, Yahweh revealed just how unique the relationship was between Yahweh and Moshe. He was also the only human being that he had actually spoken to directly. More importantly, Moshe was able to see the image of Yahweh. Even Abraham, who had been considered as a friend of God, did not have that sort of relationship with Yahweh. Even though Yahweh was extremely angry, he did spare their lives. What he did to Miryam should be a strong reminder to all Israel that it is important not to put Yahweh to the test. But as we will see in Parashah 38, Korach, cousin of Moshe, also led a rebellion against him. Then Yahweh destroyed Korach with his cohort there in the sight of Israel. Coming back to verse 10, when the cloud was removed from above the Mishkan, Miryam was snow white with Sarah. Immediately, Aaron realized the gravity of the error and pleaded with Moshe for forgiveness. Moshe pleaded in turn with Yahweh, and Miryam was healed. All knew from past experience that once a person was inflicted with Zarat, it was there for the rest of their life. Miryam had been inflicted from head to foot. But it's only because of the pleadings of Moshe that she was restored to good health, but not until after 7 days had passed. Hence, the suddenness of the infliction and the completeness of the affliction showed that Zahara was not leprosy, as suggested in many Christian versions of Scripture. This whole scenario stands as a good reminder of how anyone who stands up against the appointed of Yahweh, that person is sure to incur his wrath. Aaron and Miryam, both brother and sister of Moshe, should have known better than to contest the leadership and authority of Moshe. Clearly, they realized the error of their ways, of their own words. Is it true that Yahweh has only spoken with Moshe? Hasn't he spoken to us too? Similar words were uttered by the adversary through the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Genesis chapter 3 verse 1, Satan said, "Did God really say that you are not to eat from any tree in the garden?" Just like Miryam and Aharon, the adversary's challenge was also expressed as a question, designed to engender doubt in the minds of the hearers. Then the adversary continued by qualifying his question with the words, "Because God knows that on the day you eat it, your eyes will be opened, you will be like God and know good and evil." In the same manner, Miryam and Aharon, following their question with the supporting argument, saying, "Hasn't he, Yahweh, spoken to us also?" The words used in both these situations remains a stern reminder to all who speak against any that Yahweh have called to fulfill special roles. And even in this 21st century, after all, even Yeshua himself warned his generation about how they were misleading that he had personally called as emissaries. He warned the people through the parable in Matthew 25 verses 34 to 46 how the future would be for those who knowingly neglected the needs of the chosen ones. So we see through the words of Bamidbar, or Numbers chapter 12, and the words of Yeshua, that neither Yahweh nor Yeshua will tolerate the abuse of those who've been called and given special tasks in this life. Outworking of the whole chapter and the words of Yeshua in the parable should together be a constant reminder how Yahweh expects his chosen people to be supported and acknowledged rather than be abused and neglected. Now I want to turn to that second topic, which is in Bamidbar chapter 8, where we are told about the setting apart of the Levi'im. In verses 6 and 7, Yahweh instructs Moshe how the Levi'im are to be set apart. They are to take the Levi'im from among the people of Israel, cleanse them. Here's how you are to cleanse them, with sprinkling them with purification water, and having them shave their whole body with a razor, and have them wash their clothes and themselves. The purification process appears to only occur on one occasion, at the time when the Levi'im were actually being set apart for the service of Yahweh. However, nowhere does the narrative say or imply that the Levi'im remained in a shaven state for the rest of their period of service. It also appears that to have been a once-off cleansing process designed to set them apart when they were actually sprinkled with the water of purification. Verse 7 does not give us any details about the purification water, but it appears it may well have been the same water mixed with the ashes of the red heifer, which were prepared for the cleansing of those who've been close to a dead body, which is spoken about in detail in Bamidbar chapter 19. Now the red heifer water was primarily for that purpose of cleansing a person who'd been in contact with a dead body. And they, of course, had been rendered corpse unclean. However, with the purification of the Levi'im, it was also means that they were being set apart from the rest of Israel for the service of Yahweh. So being sprinkled with the purification water and then fully shaven, all human impurities were removed, which is a formal symbolization of resurrection. It had to occur in that way. In the eyes of Yahweh, all human beings are in a state of separation from him because of the actions of our original parents, Adam and Hava. So through the sprinkling of the water of purification and the shaving of the Levi'im, they were being set apart from the rest of Israel in the same way that those who are called by Yeshua through the Ruach HaKodesh have to go through a full body immersion, which separates us apart before we can actually enter into the service of Yahweh. As we saw earlier in earlier chapters of Vayikra or Leviticus, Aaron and his 4 sons were washed with water by Moshe and then set apart through a whole week-long consecration process in the confines of the Mishkan courtyard. Once that separation of the Levi'im, in a similar manner, from Israel was complete, they still had to atone or be purchased by Yahweh. That is because no human being can serve Yahweh without first being bought at a price. So each member of the Levi'im had to place his hands on the head of a bull, which was being set apart as a burnt offering. Just as Aaron, every time he entered the Mishkan on Yom Kippur, had to take the blood of a young bull as a sacrificial offering for himself and his own separation from God. All that had to happen before he could enter the Mishkan on behalf of the people. In the same way, because the Levi'im were actually being given tasks related to the Mishkan, they also had to take part in the cleansing ritual during their consecration process. That is why each one of them had to place his hands on the head of the young bull that was becoming the sin offering. Once the sin offering was sent up in smoke, along with the supporting grain offering, the Levi'im were assembled in front of the Mishkan in the courtyard as a wave offering from the people, in a way that the people could acknowledge that they had been set apart from the rest of the community. So the whole ritual relating to the Levi'im being set apart was in response to the need for the firstborn males, either human or animal, to be set apart for Yahweh. Every firstborn male belonged to Yahweh, who offset the death of the firstborn of Egypt. Because as the angel of death passed over the houses of the people of Israel, when he saw the blood of the Pesach lamb on the doorposts of their houses, the lives of the firstborn males in that house were spared. So as Yahweh had taken the lives of all the Egyptian firstborn males, so also the life of every firstborn male in Israel should also be taken. But as Yahweh spared his people, he had to find a substitute to be taken from among Israel. Only by taking the life of every firstborn male in Israel could Yahweh be seen by the angelic realm as being totally impartial. But if the firstborn male of every family was taken, it would mean the land inheritance would then pass on to the second-born son. That is assuming that the same pattern continued or was repeated in subsequent generations. If that were the case, then in the agricultural society it would cause unending problems. So Yahweh in his wisdom set apart one whole tribe as a substitute. Hence the Levi'im were taken from the tribe of Levi. And, as verse 11 says, so that they may do Yahweh's service. When I say Levi'im were taken from the tribe of Levi, we see that the word Levi'im describes the type of role that they would have in Israel. They were to stand alongside the Cohanim, that is, the males of the family of Aaron. The Levi'im were responsible for the killing and preparation of the sacrificial animals. They were also responsible for the maintenance of the Mishkan on practical level, along with their responsibilities of also teaching and judging within the community. Finally, chapter 8 concludes with Yahweh giving further instructions to Moshe regarding the period of service demanded from the Levi'im. As it says in verses 24 to 26, here are the instructions concerning the Levi'im. When they reach the age of 25, they are to begin performing their duties in the tent of meeting. And when they reach the age of 50, they are to stop performing this work and not serve any longer. They will assist their brothers who are performing the duties in the Mishkan, but they themselves will not do any kind of work. This is what they are to do with the Levi'im regarding their duties. Each man was to give just 25 years of service at the Mishkan, and then they were to act as advisors to the young Levi'im who was entering into service. Why are all these matters important? It's because the greater outworking we will look at through Yeshua. Through his sacrificial death, he paved the way for all Israel to be brought back from their broken relationship with Yahweh. Through his sacrificial death, he atoned for the sins or separation not only of Israel, but all humanity. Through his sacrificial death, Yeshua paved the way for all mankind to be resurrected into the reign of restoration, which will occur after his return. However, people will be resurrected in two separate and distinct stages. Firstly, there will be those who are part of the first resurrection, who have been given the promise of being Cohanim, that is, alongside Yeshua himself as the Kohen HaGadol, the great high priest. That promise is confirmed in Revelation chapter 20 verse 6, where it says, "Blessed and holy is anyone who has part in the first resurrection. Over him the second death has no power. On the contrary, they will be Cohanim of God and of the Messiah, and they will rule with him for 1,000 years. Then comes the second resurrection, which is the promise to all the rest of mankind, who have lived and died since Adam and Hava. This promise was confirmed by Shaul when he was giving his testimony to the Roman governor in Acts chapter 24 verse 15. I continue to have a hope in God that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. From his words we can see that he is speaking about the two different groups of people, the righteous and the unrighteous, with the latter having part in the second resurrection. That is the resurrection that will be like the one given to Eleazar or Lazarus just a short time before the death of Yeshua. Eleazar was resurrected back into an earthly body and lived for an unknown period of time. So all who have part in that second resurrection will also remain in a bodily form during the reign of Yeshua. Then all those who have part in the second resurrection will also have to face the great white throne judgment on the 8th creative day. So returning to Revelation chapter 20 verse 6, those in the first resurrection will be Cohanim of God and the Messiah, and they will rule for 1,000 years. But as there are going to be Cohanim, there must also have to be Levi'im to work alongside them. So where do the Levi'im come from in the Olam Haba, or the age to come? In answering that question, we need to turn our attention to Ezekiel chapter 43 and 44, where Yahweh takes Ezekiel on a guided tour of the Temple Mount. Starting in chapter 43 verses 1 to 4, Yahweh shows Ezekiel how the glory of God will return to the sanctuary. It approaches from the east. He brought him to the east gate, just as the glory of God was approaching. His voice was like the sound of rushing water, and the earth shone with his glory. Then moving on to chapter 44, verse 4, Ezekiel says, "Then he brought me to the north gate, to the front of the house. I looked and saw Yahweh's glory filling the house, and I fell on my face." Yahweh spoke again with Ezekiel, that time telling him how Yahweh would be served offerings on the restored altar, and who would be responsible for serving at that altar, when he says in verses 9 through 14, "No foreigner, uncircumcised in both heart and flesh, is to enter the sanctuary. No foreigner living among the people of Israel. Rather, the Levi'im who went far from me when Israel went astray, going astray after their idols, they will bear the consequences of their guilt, and they will serve in my sanctuary. They will slaughter the burnt offerings and the sacrifice for the people, because they served them in the presence of their idols and became an occasion for sin in the house of Israel. I am raising my hand against them, says Yahweh Elohim, and they will bear the consequences of their guilt. They will not approach me and serve me in the office of Cohen, or approach any of the holy things, but they will bear the shame for their disgusting practices they committed. I will put them in charge of my house and all its maintenance and everything to do with it." Those are the strong words that Yahweh said to Ezekiel. But through it all, we see that the Levi'im will be part of that second resurrection, and will also have an active role right through the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua. Why would Yahweh want the Levi'im of old again to serve in his new sanctuary during the reign of Yeshua? I have always felt that it made no sense to involve men. The time that Israel entered the land until the destruction of the second temple had been in each generation responsible for leading Israel away towards idol worship. In the ancient times, the Levi'im were the ones who had been vested with the responsibility of teaching the words of Torah to the people. They alone had access to the scrolls that Moshe had written. They were the ones who at the time were responsible for writing new scrolls as the old ones became worn out from use. They were also the Torah-teachers who were constantly challenging and questioning Yeshua all the way through his earthly ministry. So why would Yahweh want the same resurrected Levi'im to serve him in the Olam Haba? I went to bed last night pondering the same question, and in the middle of the night Yahweh gave me the answer. Reflecting back on the words of Ezekiel Chapter 44 verses 9 through 14, which I just read, fits perfectly with the answer he gave me. Those same Levi'im who had part in the second resurrection will be responsible only for the maintenance and service of the sanctuary, but they will not be given the role of Torah-teachers, judges, educators. Those responsibilities will be undertaken by the Cohanim. The Levi'im will, as 44 verse 10 says, bear the consequences of their guilt, but they are to serve in my sanctuary. Yahweh showed me that by the fulfilling of the new role as servants of the sanctuary, they will slowly redeem themselves from their past guilt, so that before the end of the 1,000 years, they may have been found worthy enough to enter into the kingdom of heaven on the 8th day and beyond. The resurrected Levi'im will remain as mortal human beings after the manner of Eleazar, because they will be part of the second resurrection, along with the rest of humanity. But, by contrast, those who have part in the first resurrection are personally called by Yeshua through the Ruach HaKodesh, and they will be Cohanim. They alone will be vested with the roles given to Aaron and his descendants, along with the roles of teaching and judging that were formerly part of the responsibility of the ancient Levi'im. So in conclusion, we see that while Yahweh called and set apart the whole tribe of Levi for the role of Levi'im during the time of that first generation was camped in the wilderness, they failed in their duty to Yahweh, allowing not only the people to be led to all sorts of worship, but also corrupting their own calling. The Levi'im were vested with the responsibility of teaching and judging, but the roles were far too much for them to handle. But Yahweh in his mercy will give those same Levi'im one last chance to redeem themselves from their corrupt ways by serving him in the future temple sanctuary, in the presence of the Cohanim, but only as servant Levi'im. If they carry through with the strict role that they have been rendered, they will render themselves worthy of life in the kingdom of heaven on the 8th day and beyond. We also saw how Miryam and Aharon, who were also Levites, challenged the authority of Moshe and his role as given by Yahweh. They, like the Levi'im, paid a great price for their rebellious actions, which is a constant reminder to us all that we cannot hold Yahweh in contempt and expect to get away with it without dire consequences. Shabbat Shalom.